Welcome to today's session. We'll be going through a previous practical for Informatics 1A, right? Because I can't do this. I can't solve it for you guys. Then what would be the point for the practical, right? So what I'll do is I'll do a similar question paper, right? This is a 2018 semester test 2 paper B, right? So that's what we'll be using to demonstrate what you're supposed to do. So we'll implement using record structures, using classes, I mean. So we'll convert the record structures to a class. So welcome to the village of Ditebucho, right? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I am Chief Toampe. Hey, there's funny names here. Having taken over the job from my father, who has recently retired. As one of my first duties, I will need to evaluate how to distribute land for residential and farming purposes. So basically, it's a land distribution system, right? So it's something related to land distribution, right? So unfortunately, my father was never one for record keeping. Therefore, I do not know how much land is currently allocated and how much is free for me to distribute. I need you to design and develop a visual basic application that my advisors will be able to use to capture the necessary data to assist me in my decision making. Okay, so excuse me. As chief, I obviously hold quite some influence in the community. If you do this correctly for me, I will be sure to put in a good word for you so that you are considered for a direct promotion to the prestigious 1B division. So let's see. So what am I looking for? Well, as someone who also did some first year programming, I know that it's important to make sure you develop code that other people can easily understand. That's true. Here's that list of requirements from my class. So this is the requirements. So have a design that supports your development. Have Make sure your project actually compiles, right? So make sure your code runs, that it doesn't crash. Make sure you clearly comment your code. Have a professional looking interface. Code must be easy to maintain. Name the project properly. Whenever possible, be sure to answer each code functionality under their own method. So this is what we call what is this? What's that term? But then what is it called? Divide and conquer. Yeah. So you break down the problem into smaller chunks and then solve each of those, basically break it down into sub problems or small problems, then solve those mini or small problems and then combine the solutions to all those small problems to end up having a fully functional solution, right? Which solves the whole problem. So this is the the information that we need, right? So what I need, right, is this. So remember, everywhere we would regularly use a record structure, we're going to substitute that with a class. So, and remember a class, right? If you, okay, let me open this. Come on, open. Okay. So if you see the difference between a record structure and a class, I hope you did watch because I did explain in one of the other videos. But then the difference between a class and a record structure, right? A class contains two things, right? Attributes and functionalities, right, basically contains two things: variables and functions or subroutines, right? And then a record structure is what it's what's called a data. The emphasis is on the data structure. It's a way for us to represent data, not functionalities. So that's the difference between the two. The record structure can only store variables. I think if you recall in informatics 1A, there's no practical whereby you were implementing a function within a record structure, right? Because that's not how record structures work. So here you have variables only. So another problem with the record structure is that with the record structure, everything, literally every data is public by default. So that means I can imagine if the ABSA or Standard Bank or any bank had made they've designed their banking system using a record structure and they made everything public. That means I can get anyone's banking details and then transfer my money to myself, which is a problem. So we cannot have that. We have to have some certain level of privacy. That's why classes come in place. So with the class, everything by default is private. And then you choose which information to make public to the user. That's the nice thing about a class. And a class can also accommodate functions and subroutines. So that's a nice thing about a class. We can have both. We don't have to write the functions separately. So what does a class basically do? It's a template, right? Or a blueprint, or we can say it's a plan to build something, right? Like a plan to build a house, right? So for example, a plan to build a house. So that plan would create a class and then put all the information written down on that plan, right? On that piece of paper to build a house and put all that information inside a class, then we can say that class represents the template or the blueprint of the object that we want to build. In this case, we want to build a house. And then when we build a house, right, we'll get to that part. When we build the object, right, or in our case, the house, we call that, let me do this. We call that instantiating the object. It's called instantiating the object, or basically putting the plan into action, right? So actually you're taking that blueprint and building the house. That's what you're doing. So informatics 1B, 3 notes. So you're putting the plan into action and then building the house. We call that instantiating, or you are building or bringing the plan to life. That's what the term instantiating means. We are building, we are manifesting the plan into real life. So since we have that out of the way, so let me do this. Okay, yeah. So since we have that out of the way, a bit of understanding of what's going on, the general understanding of what's going on. So let's start, right? Because I don't want to waste too much time going back and forth on the same thing, of which I explained in the previous tutorials that I've been sending on the group chat. So the following data must be stored by each region. So that means we're going to have multiple regions, but then we don't have to worry about creating the array. We'll create the array when we go to the form and get to the form where we are going to use the region class. Because remember, when you're creating a class, you're creating a template for one object of one thing. You can't say that one plan, I'm planning, it's a plan that involves building 100 million buildings. There's no such. So don't ever write anything spiritual and put an array of regions within the region class. That makes no sense. You are creating a plan, a blueprint for for each region or for one region. So you cannot include those. You cannot. It makes no sense to say within the plan of the house, within the plan of the house, put in a collection of plans of the same house. In a way, it's like how will the house look like when it's built? So you're telling me that you're gonna build a house and then within the house build a house or houses within the house, which makes no sense. So that's what I'm saying. Don't write that. Have a clear understanding of what a class represents. It represents one thing, one object. Don't be putting array of the same type or of that class name within its class. That makes no sense. That really makes no sense. If I was a lecturer, I'll give you a fat zero, big fat zero, because you clearly don't understand what a class is. Don't do that. Don't. So let's go through the record structure and see how we're supposed to name this. So we need to have a region. So since you guys are using Visual Studio in 2019, I'll also use that, but it's preferable to use the latest. The problem with Visual Studio 2022, right? There's this error that occurs, and if you don't know how to fix it, yeah, you're gonna have an issue. So I think that's why they generally don't. Should I store it in the same place? Okay, it's fine. Let me just store it in the same folder. So informatics one. Okay, it's 1A, right? 2018 semester test 2 memo. It's paper B, right? Paper B memo. So we're going to create. So let me see how many minutes have passed. Okay, we're still on the right track. So remember, the only difference between a class and a record structure is that one has functions and the other doesn't have functions. Even though it's deeper than that, one by default things are public, the other one by default things are private. So one is better than the other, but then that's just like the most basic differences between the two. So let me see. So in terms of our GUI, right? I'll design that later. We'll get to the GUI later. So let's start by adding our classes, right? So let me start with region. Okay, so before I start with region, let me do something. Let me teach you something important, right? Let's start with the inner one. Right, let's go to the paper. Remember that this information for each region. A is the name of the region. B is for each section in that region, meaning it means that each region has multiple sections. It has multiple sections. So we're going to have an array of sections. But then if you look at section, it also has a piece of data, which is going to be another record structure. If you're doing informatics 1A, this will be the innermost or the inner record structure, right? Because it represents another thing. So within region class, right, it's like, for example, let me show you an example what this means. It's something is a part of something, right? So it's like an engine inside of a car. So it's like this, right? So it's like an engine inside of a car, right? If you look at the car is an object on its own, right? The engine is also another object on its own, and the engine is within the car. So it's like it's like we have the car record structure, and within the car record structure, there's a engine record structure. But then since we are doing classes, we're going to represent that as objects, right? Objects meaning that they're objects. They're going to have data and functionalities. So basically, they're going to have variables and functions and subroutines. So as you can see, each represents another, even though it's within the car, right? Even though it's within the class, it's another object on its own, or it's another thing on its own. So we have to also create a class or a record structure for it. In our case, we're in informatics 1B. We have to use a class to represent that. So I'm going to say, what's the name? It's section, right? I'm going to create a section class which represents all of the information for each section. Remember, the class and record, any class or any record structure, it represents one thing, one thing, not multiple things. To represent multiple things, you'd have to go to your form, right, and create an array of that thing so that you have multiple of those things. I hope I'm making sense. A class represents one object, not multiple objects. Don't be doing spiritual things and putting arrays. Remember what I said. Don't be doing this. Don't say, oh, yeah, you said there's multiple. Let me do sections array, right? Because there's multiple sections. This makes no sense. This is a different level of misunderstanding. You are planning to build a house, right, or something, that object, and they're saying within this object it contains, or it has itself. What do you mean by it has itself? Which makes no sense. So don't ever write anything spiritual like that. So option explicit on, and then option infer off, right? So we want to be able to cast to explicitly cast, right, or convert. Cast is just a fancy name for convert. And then here we want to be able to declare all of our variables, but this is actually like global variables. And then here we want to declare all of our local variables. Just remember that. I'll I'll put a link in the description. You'll have access to the code. Don't stress about it. So why am I starting with section? Because section is something that's within that thing, right? So that when I create region, I don't have to worry about, oh, I have to create section first, then come back. No, I start with the innermost one to save myself time. So we're going to have name, right? We have name, and then there's the example data. Example data is meant to help you come up with the data type so that you know what type of data or information will be stored by that variable. So this variable will store the type of data called a string, right, or text. That's what it's going to store. So I'm going to have, let me declare here, they're called instance variables. When you get to ComSci 2A, you'll get familiar with this term. Instance variables meaning that in order for them to be used, right, there needs to exist an instance of this class, or a manifestation of this class, or an object of this class. Without that object, you can't use them, which makes perfect sense. So private, remember last time, if you watched the video, we explained underscore. So I'm gonna use underscore. So let me let me name it like this. Let me capitalize the first letter of each variable. So we're gonna have underscore name, which is a string, and then we're going to have area in whole kilometers, right? Okay, square kilometers. And then it's going to be 16, that's the example data. What data type stores the number 16? It's an integer. So we're going to have area as integer. And then if you look at area of land that has been allocated to each community member, something interesting arises here. We have each again. Remember, every time you see each, it means that there's more than one of that thing. Each region, each section, that means there's more than one section, there's more than one region. So since we're still inside section, we are representing a community member. So yeah, don't overthink it. Community member in this case won't be a whole class. It's just a number of how many community members are there. So this is just an array, because if you look at all the values at each index, right, or each position, it's a double. So it's not really a class community member, it's just a number of, it's just an integer. So I'm going to have what is it called? Area of land, right? So I'm going to say private underscore area of land. Remember, you need to make sure your code is readable. Don't declare an array and call it underscore area. There's already area there. Give it a proper name, area of land. So as double, because each value at each index is a double. And here we're going to say the size is n NC, right, which is just number of community members, right? And then we also need to declare the size here, underscore NC as integer. This will represent the size of our array. So size, okay, this is the number of community members. Like I said, community members in this case is not too deep. It's not a complex thing. It's just an integer. So don't create a whole class, because they didn't talk about, there's nowhere where they said, okay, each community member has this. If they had said that, then yeah, there would be a must for us to do that. But then that will make your application too complicated. We are not there at that level yet. So we have our array. How do I see that it's an array? Because I saw there's multiple values. This is the first value, there's a second value, there's a third value, dot, 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 meaning there's more to come, then there's a last value. There's multiple values, so I know it's an array. And then they told me that each community member, so the value is the area for each community member, meaning that it's going to be an array of size community members, or community member, however you want to phrase it. So now we get to the total area allocated, right? So total area, we have to, here they didn't explain, you have to think here. So go to question 5. Let's see question 5. So for each section in each region, using the calc array total function, calculate and store the total area that has been allocated. So we need to understand, we need to know what calc array total function returns, so that we know what type of data type will this variable store, because it will store what is returned by that function. So the data types need to match. So we go up, there's the function. They said write a function given an array, it returns a double value. So now we know, oh, okay, so this total area would be a double. Basically, the total area here that they're talking about is this arrays, this one. So basically add up all these numbers in the array. You can't add doubles and miraculously get an integer. It's not possible. But especially computers, it's impossible. Why do I say so? Even though you might say, well, what if I did this 2.5 plus 1.5? Well, this is 4.0, which is technically 4, right? Well, yeah, technically it is 4, but then it's still the same data type. It's 4.0. It's a double. So I didn't have to see that question. The moment they say total area allocated in each section, and which array or which variable stores the area of land allocated, it's this one, allocated, which is a collection of double values. So if I find the total of double values, I obviously expect a double sum, right? So let's declare that. So private underscore total area as double. We are almost done with this class. Then percentage allocated. Definitely is gonna be a double, but then let's just double check. So see question 6. So yeah, you see up until decimal what, yeah, knew it was going to be a double. So for each section in each region, calculate store in field B, whatever that field that we're trying to find the data type for, and display the percentage of land that remains unallocated in that section. This is the difference between this area and total area multiplied by 10 divided by, you see, we are dividing. So when you divide, you get a double, right? And where if you check what's going on here, which values are we using? We are using total area, which is a double. So let me teach you a trick. When you're adding, when you have two different data types that you're adding, right? Let's say you're adding an int plus a double, right? The answer, before it calculates the answer, it converts this. It literally uses CDBL behind the scenes. It converts this to a double, which is going to just be 3.0, and then the final answer will be 6.5. So that's what it does behind the scenes. So this answer would be 6.5. Why is it promoted? Well, I don't want to get too deep on that since you are informatics students, but then if you're doing C++, then it would be a different case. But then just imagine that each data type, right? When you use each data type, it defines how big that box is. Because remember, a variable is basically us telling the computer to create a box of a specific size with that label, right? So the label is this name, the variable name, that's the label. And then the data type that we use, it tells it what type of things or what type of data can go inside the box. So, and remember what I said, that box also is, we also define a size. You can view it in terms of like Coca-Cola bottles, right? Or water bottles, or any bottle. Imagine that, just imagine, right? In integer is smaller than a double in terms of size, right? So imagine this one is a 1 liter. Then this one is a 3 liter, right? Maximum. That is its maximum. So obviously, when you are using these two things, right? Obviously, which one out of these two, the integer or the double, which one is can store both? Which one is big enough to store both? It's the double. Because in like I said, imagine it's like 3 liters big, right? This one is like 1 liter. So obvious, this one needs to be converted to it needs to be promoted to be a double so that everything can be stored as a double, since the double is bigger than the integer. Is big enough to accommodate both the int and itself, right? So it's always going to be that case. You don't have to write this CDBL, it will do it automatically. You don't have to worry about that. It's just behind the scenes. I'm just explaining what happens behind the scenes. So now we know percentage unallocated, right? So I'm going to say private underscore percentage unallocated. You see the problem with having to name variables. That's why I put comments, because if imagine if I've named it that way, it's too long. You can't name a variable that long. When you see when naming variables, you have to reach a point when you say, we cannot allow this to happen. It cannot be too long. So this is a percentage unallocated, right? So there's our class. We are almost done. We can't say we are done yet. We're almost done. So the thing is, let's see here, right? The real question is, are we gonna need this? Are we gonna need what is properties? That's the question. Are the values decreasing, display in the text field, display the trend status. We'll get to that, right? We'll get to the properties, right? For now, what I'm going to do is when the object is created, I'm going to create a constructor. Remember, there's a constructor is basically the thing or the builder that helps us build our object. So you cannot build an object without a builder. You cannot build a house without a builder, right? So we need this constructor. So how do you declare it? You say public sub new, like this. So this is going to be, yeah, this is our constructor or builder who will help us build the object, right? So this will help us build the object. Which object? Section. Remember, the name of the class is the object you're trying to build. This could have easily been like house, right? But then we're not building a house. We're building a section here. So what information do we need from the user? So remember the builder, right? In order for the builder to build, they must take instructions from the client, like how big they want the house to be. Do they want the what's the color of the interior? Whether they should be fitted in furniture and things like that. All of that information you retrieve it from the client or from the person making use of your services, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to need all of this information, except for two things, right? You say there's, okay, three. These two will be calculated. Remember, we calculate total area and we calculate percentage. Things you calculate, you don't ask from the user. Why would you ask? Because you are the one who's supposed to calculate. You can't ask a calculation from the user. You are the one who calculates. And then the array, we don't pass arrays, get the array from the user. No, we get the size. So the only three things we need here is this and these two, right? So I'm going to say name as string, comma, and then since I don't want to keep typing, right, until I cannot see on my screen. What I would do is I'll align them, right? I'll type in the first parameter, right, and then put a comma, and then put a space, and then put an underscore. So this underscore is going to force the alignment, right? I'm going to press enter. You see now it aligns exactly where I started typing the first parameter. And then I'm going to type area as my second requirement from the user or information that I get from the user. And then NC as integer, which is the number of community members. So now I'm going to initialize my instance variables, right? My data. So let's initialize it. So I'm going to say underscore name. So that's why you put an underscore, so that when we create our constructor, right, and we happen to name it exactly the same way, the computer can tell the difference, which one is part of the class and which one is information that we're getting from the outside world or from the user. So underscore is equals to name. You see, it distinguishes now. There's two different colors. If we didn't do this, right, we just named it name, right, without the underscore. Let's do that. You see now, it says unnecessary, it even complains saying there's an unnecessary assignment here because you're assigning value, it thinks you're assigning it to itself because now it's confused. You have name here, which is the constructor, and you have name there, which is inside of a class. So now it's like, which one is which? Are you saying the constructor's name, which is this one is the one on the left, and then the one in your class is this one? Or you're saying the one on your class is on the left, or and then the one in the constructor is the one on the right? Which one is which? It's confused. So sometimes if you don't, there's two approaches. You can just put an underscore there, name it with an underscore to distinguish, right? Or you can just be stubborn and stick to the same name and then use this keyword called me, right? You see, use me and then you say dot. So what me does is saying go to me, my name, the one inside of me, right, inside of this class, and then equate it to name. So for the sake of in, you guys getting familiar with all the different techniques, right? You had already taught this underscore technique in class. So what I would do is I'll use me for this practical. Me dot. So the moment I say dot, it shows me all the things that are available within my class, within me or within section. So I want to set the area is equals to area. And then me dot nc, which is the number of community members, is equals to nc, the one that I'm passing on my construct. Yeah, so there we go. We've initialized our variables here. They are initialized. So for this practical, I'm not sure what, because majority of them, I think here we have, oh yeah, I see now. You see input of each region, including each section in that region. So you must allow to input the relevant region and their relevant section data, storing this in a single array of a custom data type, right? Which is basically what we're doing. But then you see, they didn't say you should display. You see, the properties are only used to retrieve or to change values, right? Here they haven't said that we should retrieve each information for the information for each region and then display it. The only thing that they want here, look at what they want. They want you to calculate and display the percentage of land remains unallocated. They didn't say create a function. You see, we're not supposed to use a function here. And we need the difference between the area, BI, and total allocated. So we need to access this data, right? And we need to be able to display the percentage of land of remains unallocated. So you might be confused a bit here, but then let me try and explain it simply, right? Let's try and decipher how to go about it, right? Like in terms of how do you know which property methods to use? Should I use the get, the read only, or the write only, or both? So let's see. I use my approach, right? I hardly, I highly, not hardly, I highly recommend you use a construct to give your variables inside of your class the initial values. And then when it comes to things like this, calculations that you have to do inside of your form, you make available only the things that you're supposed to use, not anything else, right? So let's read everything that we need to do here. Regions rating. Oh, okay, we're still not done with the rate. We haven't done the region class, right? That's fine. So we won't touch that for now. Let's look at what is this? Section class, right? So let's look at what the things should we make available to our client. Remember, by default, everything is private. We need to use properties or basically make copies of the information via properties. Then they access the copy via the property. Then they can either change the original via that copy mechanism, or they can access via that copy mechanism, which is a property, the property methods, right? So let's see here. For each section in each region, calculate and store in field BV, right? So we are storing, it even tells you we are storing here. So if in order for me to store, how do you store? This is how you store. When they say store, you're saying is equals to something. So that means I should be able to set it, right? The percentage allocated. That means I should be able to set it. So we understand that part, right? We know that we should be able to set it. So far I'm only seeing that I need to make it a write only. But then I'm going to read continuously and see if there's more information on the way. This is the difference between this and that. So you see, we are accessing area and total area, right? So we're accessing those two. So with total area and area, let's create property methods for those because we are 100% sure what they need to do. We need to access area and total area. You can ignore all of this and just declare both, right? You should be able to access, but then you fail to understand the real reason why we need classes because we need to restrict. If things are not meant to be read, they're not meant to be read. If things are not meant to be changed, they're not meant to be changed. So remember total area, right? This total area over here. We will calculate it within the class. So don't worry how the value be initialized. The area, we do initialize it when we instantiate the object. So that's covered. We have the information. And it didn't say that you should allow the user to change the area. All it says is just access the area. So let's do that. So you should be able to access. So I'm going to create a public read only, right? Because they say you should only read, you should be able to access, which is read only. Read only property for area, right? So I'm gonna call it area as the area is what is it is an integer, right? If I'm not mistaken. And then obviously my IDE is not auto-completing. So since it's read only, it's actually it's going to use a get statement because we are getting that value to read it, right? So get, and then what am I getting? Return me dot area. Okay, I see we having issues here. So we might have to go back to the normal convention, right? Because you see, it's confused. Which area do you mean? Because there's something already named area. So you could just name it something else and say area prop, right? To say that's an area property. You could say that, but then I don't want to say that, so let's just stick to the underscores. But then at least you now know the me command. Because as time goes on, when you get to inheritance, right, you're gonna need to learn a command called my base. Yeah, there's another command called my base. And then dot, you access, basically you access things. You'll get to that when you get to that. So obviously I won't need the me now. That's redundant. There's no need since they are actually different. They are distinguished by the underscore. So when it sees the underscore, it says, oh, this is the one inside of my class. And then the other one without the underscore is the other one. And then I'm going to return underscore area, right? And then we also need another property method for the total area. Is it the total area? Yeah, it's the total area. So private read only property total area as integer, right? And then end property, and then this is going to be a get statement because we are getting or reading the total area. So underscore total area, return that value. Oh, it's a double. So the types need to match, right? You can't declare a property that returns a different type that you're going to return here. It needs to match. So what happens is it returns this, right? It takes this value, it makes a copy and then stores the copy via this property. So now you only work with the copy. You don't work with this original, which is very convenient. You don't want people going to their bank accounts changing their balance to I'm a trillionaire because they have access to the original value. No, they should only have access to the copy. Yeah, let me show you the power of copy, right? Let me make a simple example, right? Let me go to Eve, right? Let me show the power of copy. So I'm going to select this to show you that every time you're always working with the copy, not the original. I'm going to click inspect. It's going to open exactly that text, and then I'm going to change that text here and rename it and say Welcome to my amazing website. Haha. If you remember haha from Black Clove. So I'm going to close that and then look. Welcome to my amazing website. Haha. You see, you're still working with a corp. Don't be too brave and too confident, like, yeah, I can now hack you, Jay. Yeah, you'll go to prison. Don't do that to yourself. Yes, you're not that good. You're just working with the copy here. So if I refresh here, you'll see it'll go back to its normal state. So I refresh. Because you're working with the copy, you are changing only a copy, not the original. So this is what we're doing here in essence. That's what we're doing. So that you understand what you're doing. So you don't just cram and be like, yeah, because they said so. No, because you understand why it needs to be done that way. And then display the percentage of land remains unallocated in that section, right? So we need to display the percentage of land that remains unallocated in that section. So since the percentage of land, right, this percentage here, it needs to be calculated. So we need to do two things. We need to set it and we need to access it. So I'm going to create a property method with both. Because if you read here, we haven't stored the value, right? We need to calculate it. So we need to store it first, which is get the value. No, store it, which means set the value. And then they also said you should display, which means we need to get the value. So I'm gonna need both statements, get statement, which is this statement, and the set statement. So basically, I'm going to create a property method with both properties, or no pun intended, with both functionalities, right? So percentage, I'm going to name it the same percentage as double, and then end property, and then I'm going to say get enter. So you see it has two. I can set the value and I can also get the value, which is what we need to do. Remember, the percentage is calculated. It's not something that's set via the constructor. You could set it via the constructor, but then remember, in order to set it via the constructor, you'd have to actually initialize area and total area first. So calculate those ones first before you can do all the other things, which is going to make it a bit complicated. So let's not do that. Let's make the percentage property method with both statements, the get and the set. So return underscore percentage. And then here is going to be underscore percentage is equals to the value that we're getting from the user, right? This is the value that we're getting from the user. So now the user can do two things. They can do something like this. Let's say message box, and then they say percentage whatever that object is, whatever I've named it, right? Let me say I've named it regions, right? Regions, that specific index, it's going to be I, whatever, dot percentage, not region, sections, I mean. Sections dot percentage. We can now say is equals to, we can use the is equals to, we can set it. That's what this part section of code does. Okay, not inside the message box, but I'm just showing you. And then you can now display also within the message box. So when it's used within the message box like this section is executed. It gets the percentage and then it displays it via the message box. So that's important to understand. So that's why I said the percentage of land that remains unallocated, it needs both the get and set. So that's why I had to do it that way. So for each region, blah blah blah, display the index. Yeah, let's get to the regions now because I think we are done with the yeah, I think we're done with the section, right? We'll add the calculations as we go on, right? But then we're not done. Let me not lie, we're not done. The area of land array, we haven't resized it, right? We need to use the redeem keyword since we now have the size. So now I need to say redeem or resize my underscore area of land array. If you don't resize, you'll face issues when you try to execute it inside your form. So is equals to underscore NC. Or you can just say NC, this one that we're taking via the constructor. Either way, it's going to initialize the array because here we're setting them to be the same value. So either one you use there doesn't matter. You can use either of the two. So we have resized the array. We are good to go. But then let me see, with the area of land, I'm not sure. I will add things as we go on because so far I haven't seen anything that says we should have. Let me see. For the calc, or the total area that has been allocated. So the thing is, they just be mixing everything around. Now it's hard to tell which one belongs where. So it says write a function called calc array total that given an array of double values returns a double value that sums all of the elements in the double array. So it adds up all the values in the array. You may assume that the array passed will at least have one element in it. So just assuming that at least has one value in it. And then now they're saying for each section in each region, use the calc total array function to calculate and store the total area that has been allocated. So actually what they mean here is saying this function belongs to the section class because they said for each section first, of which each section is going to be part of each region. So therefore, we need to create this function within the section class. I know it's a bit ambiguous. It's not straightforward. Yeah, it needs you to think a bit. So we need this calc function here. So I'm going to make it public. Mm, Wait, is it in the region or let me see. I think the thing is tricky. Why didn't they become why were they not specific? But I think it's actually in the region class. Because what's the point of putting it inside the section class and passing an array of doubles, right? Think about it. We are passing this array as a parameter. Why should we pass it? We already have it here. There it is. It's already there. So what's the point of passing it within the same class? So you get what I'm saying? I don't see it belonging to this class. So it actually belongs to the other one, the region class. So let's create that one. So I'm going to right click and then add another class, and then I'm going to call it region. Region. There we go. Don't forget our option statements. Option strict on, option explicit on, option infer off. Right. So that function actually belongs here. When I look at it, actually belongs there. So it takes in an array, right? Given an array of double values, returns a double value that represents the sum of all elements in the double array. Oh, I think I see the issue here. Now I see. That's why it's a bit it was a bit tricky for me to understand. Remember, this practical is based on record structures, not classes. I think for your practical, it should be straightforward. For this one, for me, in this case, it's a bit tricky. There's many ways I can go about implementing it, right? So yeah, basically in this practical, I have the luxury of choosing where the function should go, the calc array total, right? And they said it should be given an array of double values. Here, you see here, right? It's a must for us to pass an array of doubles because there was no classes. Remember, record structures, you cannot combine them. You cannot combine the variables inside a record structure with functions. That was the problem. But then now we can combine those two. So what I'll do is I'll just declare it, I'll change it a bit. There's no need for it to take in an array of doubles. So yeah, I have to switch up this practical a bit in order to be applicable here. So I'm going to say public function calc array total. It will be parameterless. Remember that one, this practical, it was we took in an array, this one, because it was part of a record structure. Here it's within the class. I can create functions within a class. So there's no need for me to take parameters there. So as double, right? So basically this function returns the sum, right? It returns the total. So if you remember, let me go back there. So this function, all it does, right, for each section in each region, use the water to calculate the total area that has been allocated, which is the sum. So adding up all of the values, and it even tells you here in the function, it returns a double value that represents the sum of all elements in the double array. So let's sum up the values in the array. Remember, when you create the object, right, it's going to be resized. We don't have to worry about it being resized. It's already resized at this point. Don't have to worry about any of those things. And remember here, this is the nice thing about understanding your code. Look at underscore array length, right, of array area of length. Did they say you should display it, you should get it, or what? They didn't talk about that, so don't create a property method for it. That's the nice thing about a class, so it remains private. The user has no access to it. And then remember a function, right? You can use the function name as a variable. Why? Because if you look at this, right, remove the keyword function and remove the round brackets. Doesn't this look familiar to declaring a variable inside a record structure? Yes, it is. It does. So therefore, you can use the name of the function instead of creating local variables and wasting memory and things like that. So let's just use that and say, let's just initialize it to 0, right? And then at the end of the day, I know that I'm going to return that total, right? So there we go. So now I need to go through the each element, right? Each community member, and then sum up their add up their area of the land. So let's do that. So I need a for loop here. So for I as integer is equals to 1, 2. What's the stopping point? We have here, we don't have to use those special things that you were taught. I'm sure, I don't know if you can remember. Remember that you can just say area of land, right? Like this, and say dot length, right? To get the length. But then we already know the length here. I'll just say underscore NC because NC is the array of is the size of the array. If you check in our constructor, we did resize it to NC. So we are 100% sure that's the size. So now let's add up the values, which is going to be a very simple thing. So this is a very simple practical. So plus or equals, what are we adding? Area of land at that specific index I. So we go to every single index or we go to every single community and calculate and sum up the values. So this is question 4 and 5, right? And you see this, the important thing to understand. They said store. They said store. They didn't say display. So if they had said display, you would have created maybe a variable or called it inside, not really a variable, called it inside of our form, this function, called it and then output the value. They just said store, calculate and store. But then after storing, remember we would need this total area, right? Calculation of total area allocated per section. Oh yeah, we'll need this. What is this? So we need, this is the variable to store the total area. So we need to store it inside that variable. You see this, that's the thing about this one, this practical, it's a bit tricky because it wasn't changed. I'm looking at its original form. Basically, they expected you to call that function and then you initialize the value of total area to the value of that function, right? Of which there's total area here, right? So we have that. But then there's something interesting also here. Yeah, that's the thing with when you're working with the practical in its raw form that wasn't changed. Your practicals will be straightforward. Don't mind me changing many things. Yeah. So I'm thinking about something here that I totally forgot. You see this array here. Okay, it's fine, right? We see this function, it's fine. We'll leave it here. We'll calculate and then call it in our main and then use it to resize the total area. So that means total area, we need to actually change it now because it now does two things. We can get it and we can set it. Right, so we need to actually be able to do two things. So I need to put a set here and say value. The value that I'm getting is going to be a double because total area is of type double. And then and set and then remove the read only so that the property has both now. So this is going to be underscore total area is equal to that value that will pass that side. So now total area, it needs to be changed a bit to accommodate both, right? Because I want to initialize it to this calculation. And then there's also this important thing, area of land. We still need to be able to initialize it and use it, right? Not really get it, right? Because remember, we are only using it here. So I don't need to read the value. So I'll just set the value. I don't need to read it. So how do I set? So that's going to be a write only property because I only want to write, right? No pun intended. And then as double. And then obvious, this is going to have a set statement. So remember, this is an array, so we need to pass in an index, yes. So index as integer or the position in the array, right? So let's set the value. So underscore area of land at that specific index is equals to value. So we're just going to use this to store the values in the array, right? That's it. So write only. And then we call this method with the calculation, and then just store the answer inside total area. Then we use total area to display the total area. So I think this should be pretty much it, right? This is pretty much everything we need. Okay, so that means I have close to an hour to create the other class. So let's implement the other class. Okay, so another thing that's going to be annoying is the grid. Yeah, that's not gonna happen. Personally, I'm not gonna use the grid. I'm just gonna use a button. I don't want to make the tutorial too long because if I do the grid, that means I have to set the rows, columns, create that subroutine by val row as integer, by val call, all those things. Yeah, and then resize the grid. Yeah, that's set the rows and things. Yeah, that's too much work. So I don't want to make the video too long either way. So yeah. So calculation of total area per region, that's fine. So we are done with this class, right? Everything's there, it's intact, everything we 100% sure everything will work as we intend, right? So and I have so now we go back to region, right? So let's look at region. So region has name, which is this one, which is a string. So we have the region class that I've declared here. So let's start using it. So private underscore name. It also has a name, this class. So string, right? And then the region also has multiple sections because it says for each section. So that means, remember we created the class. That's why I created the section class first. So that when I get to this part, right, I can easily use it without any errors. So here I'm going to have sections, right? And then open bracket as section, just like the record structure. Remember the record structure, you say as section rec, right? Something like that, or as just section. Here we're dealing with classes. It's still the same. If you think about it, if you look at it, it's still the same. The only difference is that now we're including functions within our classes. And then index of section, that is the most unallocated area. Index is usually an integer. So let's see question 7, right? Calculate and display the index that is the highest. Yeah, it's going to be an integer. So private, okay, before we do that, we need the size of the sections, right? So underscore n sections as integer, number of sections, and then private underscore index as integer. We're going to use that to calculate, and then we're going to retrieve the index. So that's important. We need to understand we are retrieving, we're doing all these things. We need to understand what are we retrieving. If we're retrieving, and we need to have a get statement, a properties method with the get. If we are changing, we need to have a property method with a set. For each region, calculate store in field D. Let's look at field D, which is region rating, right? And store and display. You see, so displaying, that means we're also getting. So I need to make this the property method for this one needs to have both. So what is the rating? There's the rating. So the rating is going to be in integers. So I'm going to have private underscore rating as integer. Okay, so I was supposed to capitalize this. Yeah. So now let's look at our constructor. Like this. Okay, so it wants me to create it first before I can add comment. And then this is going to be our region constructor. Right, so this is our region constructor. So what are the things that we need to initialize? Okay, name we know for sure, and sections. Those two things we know for sure. So the only things that we are not entirely sure that still have to be calculated is sections, index, and rating. Sections, obviously, we still need to get the input from the user. So we need to have a property method with the set, because we need to set the sections values or allow us to set, like we need to have that. So I'm going to have name as a string, and then comma underscore enter, and then n sections as integer, comma underscore. Is that all? Yeah, that's all. Okay, this is sweet. Only two inputs. So I'm going to have underscore name is equals to name, and then underscore sections is equals to sections. Oh no, n sections. N sections is equals to n sections, which represents the number of sections. And then since we now have the number of sections, we can resize our array. So redeem underscore sections to underscore n sections. Right, so we have that. Yeah. So we have that sorted. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So now let's look at the things that we need to display and things like that so that we know how to declare the property methods for each. So the percentage of remains what unallocated, this one was for the section, right? We handled that because all of these values are inside the section class. Now we get to region. This is where we get information about region and display the index. The index needs to be displayed. So I need to have property, come on, property methods, right? So let's see what we need. So sections array, remember we need to be able to set the sections, right? So I'm going to create a property method for that called, which is going to be a write only. Because so far we're not sure if we're supposed to display, right? Let me see. And display the index of the section. Right? Yeah, this is we're displaying the regions here. And then here and display the regions. You see? Yeah, so we're displaying the regions. So far the only things that this array only needs to be write only. We don't need any extra things. We don't have to do any extra things to it. So sections, okay, so it takes an index since it's an array as integer, and then the data type of that array is section as section, and then end property. Okay, and then I'm going to need a set since I'm setting, oh, I see my problem. I was supposed to write public. So we have this, right? So that means underscore sections array at that specific index is equals to that value, this one. Well, it's not as integer, it's as section. Yeah. Yeah, I think this should suffice. This should allow us to set the values, right? Hopefully I'm doing it right. This should allow us to set the value, right? Yeah. This should allow us to set the value. So we have that. Let's see. So we said the index needs to be displayed. We also need to calculate. So store, calculate. So we need to do two things. We need to get the value and set it. So basically, I'm going to create a property method that does both, right? With both set and get, because that's what the requirements are. You should be able to calculate and store and then display it. So the return underscore index, this would help us display when you have to display. The get statement is for getting, which is, remember, this is statement inside read only. This is the statement inside a write only. If you have both, you can read and write. So you can read the value and change it or write it. In our case, we need both because they said you should calculate. Because remember, the index is not initialized via the constructor. We are not using the constructor to initialize that. You could, but then we don't want to do that. It doesn't seem reasonable, but you can. It's allowed. And then what else do we need? The rating. Let's see with the rating. I think we're supposed to do the same thing with the rating. Calculate, store, and display. So yeah, it's the same thing with the rating. So public, it is both. Rating also has both. The rating is also an integer. Then end property. And then get, press enter. Return underscore rating. Then underscore rating is equals to the value that we're getting from the user. Yeah. So all of these calculations, right? Remember, I made it to be both accessible and changeable, modifiable, right? So you can access it and modify it. And then assess the rating of each region. Are the values increasing or decreasing? Display this result in a text box. Yeah, we'll get to that, right? I don't think I don't think it's necessary to implement the code per se, right? I don't think so, because I think the main thing or the main issue guys we're having is constructing these classes or coming up with how to know to structure this thing. So we are basically done with creating this thing, right? So let's start creating it, right? So let's go to our form because we're done with both classes. This class, the region class, remember, they didn't say you should have what this sort of function or whatever. No, they just said you should calculate the region and blah blah blah. So yeah. So we only have one function here, which is fine. So what I'm going to do is I'll just use a button. I don't want to waste my time doing the design. Yeah, so I'll just use this one button, right? Where everything of mine is going to run. That one button. And then remember, we need to also have our option statements here. Option strict on, option explicit on, option infer of. So we have our option statements, right? So remember, there's multiple regions. You might be confused with which class to use. Remember, if this was a record structure, which record structure would you use? You'd create the variable of the region class, right? The region, because that's the one that's the big one. It has another record structure within it, right? Or in this case, it has another class within it. So that's the one we're going to create. So private, I'm going to call it regions because there's multiple regions. It's an array, right? As region, right? And then I'm going to have the size also, n regions as integer, which is the number of regions, right? Number of regions, right? So we just want to implement everything inside one button, but yeah, you should use you should use UJ grid. So let's see. So we need to get the information, right? That's the first thing. So allow the user to enter the input for the relevant region. But before we do that, we need to first get the number of regions from the user. So get the number of regions from the user. So n regions is equals to input box, right? Enter the of number of regions. But then remember, this n regions is of type integer, so we have to cast whatever is returned or typed inside the input box, because whatever is typed inside the input box is treated as a string. So we need to cast it to the right type to match our data type on the left hand side, which is an integer. So that's why I'm using cint, because I have an integer. So I need to convert that to an integer. And then now I need to resize my regions array and regions, right? So I've resized my regions array. Now I can start getting input, right? So remember, what are the pieces of information that I needed in order for us to create the object? So this builder requires two things. Remember, the constructor is a builder. This builder requires the name of that region and the number of sections. So we're going to use local variables for that. So I'm going to say dim, the name. Let me say dim name as a string, and then is equals to, remember the input box returns a string. We don't need to cast here. Enter the region name, right? Okay, so there's multiple regions. So before I forget that, let me do this. Before I forget that, let me cut this and then declare variables outside, right, of my for loop. Dim n sections as integer. Remember, there's multiple regions, so I need to use a for loop. For integer, for r is integer is equals to 1, 2, and regions. And then this will be next region. So now I can put back, I can start asking the information. So enter the name for, let me just phrase it the right way. Enter the name for region. And then I put the region number, right? Remember, there's two ways to combine multiple things into one string, right? It's called string. It's called concatenation. You can use a plus or you can use an ampersand. I will use an ampersand. So combine it with the region number, which is R. But then, okay, this is weird. It's not complaining, but then R is an integer, so we need to cast it to a string because the input box takes in a string, right? That text that is going to display, it's of type string. So we need to cast it this R, because R, remember, it counts from 1 to the maximum number of regions. So it starts at region 1, goes to 2, 3, 4, and so forth, depending on the value inside n regions. So enter the name for region. And then I'm also gonna add a colon there. Yeah, like that. Yeah, so it's going to be like this. Let me zoom in a little bit. Yeah. So it's going to be like that. Enter the name for region, and then what's the region number, and also a colon, so that the user knows. It's also helpful for assistants when they're marking because they can catch up on things and be like, yeah, did you see the new episode of Demon Slayer? Yeah, that upper one has been defeated, something like that. So they can lose focus and they go back to your practical. Now they forgot where they were. They get frustrated. You see, now you lose marks because you've made someone's work harder. So just make sure you put in this to specify what region number, what section number, and so forth. And then we're gonna need to get the n sections, which is the number of sections. So we need to cast that to an integer because we know that n sections is an integer. And then input box, there we go. Enter the number of sections for, and then we do that again for what region? For region, okay, I was supposed to type region here. For region, followed by the index number, basically what region it is, and I combine with the colon there. And then now, since we have these two things, we can now create or instantiate the object, right? Because we have the two pieces of information the builder requires to build. You see, we have the name and the number of sections. So now we can build. So now I'm going to go back to my regions array, that one. Regions at index r is equals to new, right? New what? Create a new region for me. Then it's going to be like, wait, you know that you are invoking the builder here, the constructor, to build a new region. So now it's going to be like, wait, the builder that you've defined, it requires two things, the name and number of sections, of which they're in the two previous lines. So I'm just going to pass in the name and sections. So if you're getting confused, why do you have to put region here? Because remember, this is the builder. Doesn't this look the same here? Isn't this new? It is new, same thing. So you're calling the builder followed by a space and then the object you want to build region so that it knows, oh, you're referring to that builder who builds a region, right? Who specializes in building regions. If you had said section like this, it'd be like, wait, this section, this builder specializes in sections and he requires these three things: the name, area, and the number of community members. So it's very important to also put in the name next to new after invoking the builder. So we now have our regions, right? And the array inside the sections array inside the region has been resized. It has been redeemed. We have all the things that we need. So now we need to get the information for the sections now, for the section. So for the section, we actually didn't really need to create all this proper. Okay, we didn't need to do all of that. We could have just created a constructor that only took one piece of information, just NC, but then it's fine. Then I'm just going to say dim here. Okay, what I will do, right? I'll avoid something, right? It might seem like it's nothing, but then try to declare your local variables outside loops. Because remember, if it's inside the loop, it's going to be repeated over and over and over. It doesn't make any sense to keep redeclaring the same thing. That's going to use a lot of, it's going to take your program is going to take a bit longer to execute. I don't expect you to worry about that now, but then just think about it. You don't want to repeat yourself. So name of section as a string, and then dim, what else do we need for the section? Area, right, is an integer, and NC, number of community members, which is number of community members, right? I'm declaring them as local variables. Why? Because before I invoke the constructor or that builder, I need to have this information already there, already available from the user. So that's why I'm using local variables. So that's important. I need to have those local variables there. So I need to go to each section for s as integer is equals to 1, 2, right? So this is very important. How do I know the number of sections, right? So it's up to you. There's many ways you can go about doing it. Writing this code, right? You can just say n sections here like this, and then you can call it a day, right? That would be correct because n sections, even though it keeps changing, but then by the time it gets here, it'll be accurate, right? Because what happens, your code, your code is interpreted or it's read from top to bottom, right? So it's going to get here, get the sections from the user, then we build the object here, and then, oh, okay, n sections it already has a value. So we are good to go, we are fine there. Or you can be strict. You can be like, no, I want the number of sections for that region, right? Which is here, it's already there. But then let's see, do we have a property method for it? We don't. So you would have to create a property method for it and say, so let me show you the other way. But then remember the number of sections here, we're only reading them. So therefore, I'll just make it a read only property. There's different ways to kill a cat. So I'm going to say n sections, right? There's different ways to solve the problem. And then this is going to have a get since I'm reading, and then return underscore sections and sections. There we go. So now I can do this. Since I have the regions, it's built, the object has been built. Remember, this line needs to be there before you can start using regions array. You need to create the object. So since I'm now sure the object exists, I can say regions at r dot n sections. So get the number of regions, the number of sections for this region R. So you see, there's the second way I can go about doing it. That's the second way. That first way, it's simpler because the end section is already there. Yeah, but then I want to introduce to you how to make use of this. Remember, this is the very same thing we were doing with record structures. There's nothing that has changed. The only difference is that classes have functions, have both variables and functions. That's the only difference. So instead of now saying dot sections, I can now also say dot calculate array total. I can now also say dot and call functions. That's the extra bit of thing that's new about classes. So now I am sure that sections is initialized. So now say, remember that in order to get, right, remember the sections array is within the regions array. There it is here, or the region class, because each region has sections, or it's like each car has what? An engine, right? But then we know that an engine has it's also its own object. It has also its own information, or it is its own class. So it's the same thing that we're doing with, if you remember, we're doing record structure. It's the same thing. To go within, you just say dot access. What am I accessing? Sections at at that specific index, right? So it goes within and it takes this property method, which makes use of that private sections array. And we need to pass in an index of which we passed. So there's that index S, and then we say is equals to, right? Okay, we can say is equals to, yeah, we can just say is equals to. Oh yeah, we need to, yeah, now I see. We need to instantiate. Remember, remember the important thing about classes, right? Before you can use it, you need to instantiate, you need to build it. Unlike record structures, you can just start using it from the get-go. Classes or object, you cannot do that. You need to build them. So you see section here, it's a section. What is section type? It's another whole class, which has a constructor. So we need to invoke the new or that builder to build before we can do other things. So that's why here I need to make use of the name of section, those variables I created. So input box, because I need to get that information first before I can instantiate the object, because the builder, for the builder that builds sections, he requires three things: a name and an area and the number of community members. So enter the name of section. What's the section number? Remember, this is very important for assistants when they are marking, when they lose track. And for section what, and for what region? Of region, or for region, whatever you want, however you want to phrase it. Of region, R variable stores the regions, right? And then it's up to you. This is extra. You can put that colon if you want. So this part is very important. I'm going to make use of this over and over, right? So I'm going to copy that, go down there and say area is equals to, area is an integer, right? So I need to make use of the convert to int function. And then I'm going to say enter the area for of section, or for section, yeah. And then paste of section, of region, blah blah, yeah. Just to save time, I don't want to keep repeating myself. Typing that number of community members is also an integer, so I'm going to use cint. I'm going to say enter number of community members for section. Remember, it's important to know which section so that whoever's marking or whoever's reading your code, it's easy to keep to know where they currently are. So if they have test data, they know, okay, this is where I left, so now I need to enter this information. So section ZS, and then I create the object. It's equals to new. So I call the builder. Which type of builder do I want? I want the section builder, the one who builds sections. Oh, this builder wants a name. We've already declared that name of section. And then this builder also wants an area. This builder also wants the number of community members, NC. So when with that being solved, right? It's now solved. We have that issue fixed. Now we can start using the regions object, right? So I'm going to copy this. Now I can start saying dot because now region exists, right? Now the sections object has been created. But then let's see what exactly do we need. Oh, we need the array. Yeah, there's number of community members. So we now need to go through all the community members and get the information. So 1, 2, NC. If you want, like I said, there's many ways to kill a cat. If you want, you can store NC. You can store NC within your class, right? Yeah, you can store NC within your class, which is section class, and then just use the property method to access it. Here in our case, we didn't store it, yeah, so I'm not gonna worry about that. Basically, you can do some exactly like this thing that I did here, but then now it's going to be a pretty long name because it's going to be regions r dot sections dot nc because nc is within the sections class, of which the sections array is within the region class. So yeah, it's going to be a pretty long name. So we can do that. There's many ways to go about doing it. So this is the easiest way to go about writing it. But then if you feel like you like problems, then you can do it that way. But then I feel like doing it that way, it also gives you a better understanding of how property methods work. So that I think a lot of students face errors with things not being accessible, property methods not being used the right way. So you see, let me show you we have that there, right? So let me create the property method. Let's use property methods for it. Since I only want to read the number of community members, I'm going to create a read-only property. So NC, so it says NC as integer, then end property, and then get, and then return underscore NC. Right, so there it is. So now we can use the NC property, which helps us get the number of community members. So now instead of saying NC here, I can say regions at index r dot sections array at index s dot NC. Why is it complaining? No, is write only. It's read only. It's not write only. Oh, it's okay, yeah, now I see. So the issue here is the sections. I've made it write only, meaning that you can only say use it accompanied with an equals sign, right? But then you cannot get a value, which is now an issue because we also want to access. You see, that's the thing about property methods. If you change there, you must also change there. So here I must now say it should also be able to return the sections at that specific index. So I can now read the sections, right? You see, now the error is gone because this was saying, okay, here it's not like you're not saying n what is equals to. So there's no equal sign. So you're trying to access of which you don't have. You didn't say you should be able to read from it. So that's why I had to change my property to make it readable, right? To be able to read. Then now I have what's the name of my array here? Yeah, I've called it area of land. So now we need to do pretty much this. If you remember your record structures, this was always there. You would always have three arrays, right? This will be C is equals to area of land. It has to be a double, right? Input box, and then enter the number. So enter the area of land. So enter the area of land. So let's see. So let me go up there and see what is required. So the area of land that has been allocated. Okay. So this is going to be a very long input, right? So the area of land allocated to community member, and I specify the community member's number. So I also need to specify the region and the section. So I'll copy that. So the community member, which community member? C stores the community member's number. So it's number what, which community member. And then and I need to also say for section. And then after section, that's when I can paste my code. So for section, what section specifies it there? So this will specify the section. And then what region, this will specify the region. And then also add that extra, that colon at the end. So we now have our full functional application, right? We haven't added things like calculating the percentage allocated on all of those things. But then I feel like this should suffice. I don't want to make the video too long. So let's just test it out. So let's run and test to see if everything is working. So let's click number of regions. Let me just say, I don't want too many regions. Let me say one region. And then the name of region one, I'm just gonna call it region one. Number of sections, let's say only 2 sections. Yeah, you see it's displaying perfectly fine. Enter the name of section one of region one. You see, even if the assistant gets too busy with other things and then they come and they're like, oh, section one of region one, that's the name I'm supposed to enter. Okay, let me do that. So I'm just going to call it section one, region one. The area is an integer, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's an integer. But that's a pretty small number. So let me add like 4,000 and then enter the number of community members. So that's the array, right? How many values do I want for the array? So let me say 4 values. So member one, community member one, right? So let me say 2, comma. This is a tricky part. Sometimes your code might crash if you use a comma instead of a dot. Sometimes it might crash if you use a dot instead of a comma. It depends on the settings on your computer. So let me use, I think mine last time it was supposed to use a com. Yeah, it's supposed to be a com. So 4, comma 5, 90, comma 2, 3, comma 33, comma 2. Name of section 2, region 1. I'll just call it the way it is, section 2, region 1. And then area for section 2 of region 1. Just any big number. Enter the number of community members. So let's say 3. And then 9, comma 300, not dot, comma 34, 200, comma this. And then everything works perfectly fine, didn't crash. Just that I didn't display the calc total, right? So let's just do that. Let's just quickly do that. So let's look at so the calc total is inside our section class. Calc array total. So we need to call it inside of our section class. So once I'm done here, outside here, after getting the information from my array, I need to say regions, right? At r dot sections array, it uses the s index dot total area. Remember they said you should store the total area inside the total area variable, right? Which is this one. But we have a property method called total area for it. And we're going to use that to display. So is equals to, what is it equals to? Regions at r dot sections at s dot calc array total function. So we need to call the calc array total function, right? So within my regions class, go to the sections array. Within the sections array, at that section, calculate the total for that section. And then now remember with area, right? With total area, this area, total area, if I go to section, I can also get it. I can also access it. So therefore, let me display it via the message box. So let me say message box and then say total area of, or total area for, okay, section, right? Section control, what section it is, and what region it is. So section, region, and then CST, CSTRS, and then for that region, and what's the value, right? So for that region, and the value is going to be let me just say is, right? That region is, let me put that space there, and then combine again. Okay, I don't need to convert to string, not necessarily, especially with the message box. It takes in objects, right? So I don't necessarily need to convert to string, but then it's like a good habit. So there it is. So there's the total area. So we're just displaying the total area. So I think the other questions you could do them. I don't have to like really go through them. You could do them. So let's see. How many regions? Let's do 2 regions because we want to see 2 outputs, right? So the name for reg 1, number of sections. Let me have one section because I don't want when you have to calculate the array total, it's gonna take too long if there's multiple sections. So the name of section 1 is going to be sec1, and then area, let's say that's 9,000, and the number of community members, basically the number of values in the array, let's say 4 values. So let's put a value that we know for sure how it's going to turn out. So 100, right? Let's say 400, right? The sum should be 400 dairies, so it's adding up correct. Total area for section 1, region 1 is, and then there's the 400. And then, okay, we're done with region 1, we're still going to another region. So this will be reg 2, number of section 1 section, not too many sections here. And then area 4,000. Community members, right, for section, it's 4 again. Let me say 250 plus 100, that's 350, plus 100, that's 450, plus 450, that should be 900. So there we go. It's adding up correctly. So this is how they want you to go about implementing this practical. So I'll put the code, I'll upload the code, and then it's going to be at the bottom description of the video. So hopefully this helps. All the best with your practical.